I love to be here in my favorite country, giving actually my first talk at a first conference. Sorry, I had to make that one. Today I will be talking about silos and ultimately why they hinder you from bridging those response gaps. A big reason why I'm here today is because I got inspired. And similar like all of you today, I was sitting in a first conference last year in a talk by Carsten Zimmerman. He was talking about how to save your SOC from starvation. And it was a very interesting talk and got me inspired. And I had a conversation with Carsten after the talk. And many of the ideas he was floating around and introducing, to some degree, we have already done that. And that was quite insightful for me. And this is what got me today here to this stage. Because today in this talk, I want to share with you our journey on how we came there and what kind of lessons and hurdles we had to get through in order to get there. So hopefully after this talk, similar like I was inspired by Carsten, you maybe get inspired by me, and maybe next year or some year after, you will share your stories about experiences you have made, good or bad. I think both are really valuable for the community, or also things you are doing really well already. Because I think everyone in this room here has something to give back to the community. So a few words about myself, and I don't want to dive too deep into this one. I think every one of you can either read my bio or find me on LinkedIn or something like that. So in a nutshell, I'm the head of cyber defense at Mercedes-Benz, and I'm the global lead for what we call the Cyber Intelligence and Response Center. The role at Mercedes, as you can see in the picture, is perfect for me because I do have two big passions in my life, and the first one is cyber, but the other one is fast things. So cars kind of fit that theme very well. All right. So to set the scene a little bit. So as the title suggests, we're going to talk about silos, but not the ones you see up there on the right. It's more about silos which reflect an artificial barrier some of us have either intentionally or unintentionally created. We all know these and have seen these or come across these in our day-to-day life or in our work life. And sometimes they work in favor of something. But I would argue other times they cause inefficiencies, they keep information boxed in, they prevent collaboration, and therefore foster misalignment and conflict. So for the presentation, I have divided it basically into 3 chapters. In the first chapter, we will talk about which silos we have identified and overcome. In the second chapter, we will talk about our recent setup. So I will share some insights on how we actually operate and how we run things. And last but not least, in the last chapter, I want to share a little bit on where this journey potentially is going to. So let's get started on this journey together, and we dive straight into the past, actually. So those are basically what we call the old days, so to say. So there we speak from a time frame prior to 2016. So back in the days, there was a small team called Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or short CIRC, which was surrounded by many teams claiming the title of SOC. And I think maybe some of you have also had that experience. So the CIRC back in the days was mainly externally staffed. It had 3 core functions: information, service, threat management, and incident management. It was not operating 24/7 during that time and had no very well-defined mandate. So in hindsight, I would say it was more of a supporting function than actually a full-blown CIRC. And I think that's also somehow reflected by the name. Besides the CERT, there were many teams scattered around it across the organization claiming to be a SOC, but none of them really had a holistic approach and didn't even know exactly what security operations ultimately meant. So they couldn't really describe and fulfill that role from my perspective. So let's talk about the silos we had back then. And of course, there's many more. I'm just focusing on, from my perspective, the most relevant ones. The silo number one is a data silo. So as I already mentioned, there were other teams claiming to be a SOC. And of course, they all protected their own small little island and treasured very much the data they had access. So one example here is the antivirus team, for example, which was really just looking at antivirus alerts and then also already interfacing with support teams or help desk teams in order to do something with it. Silo number two is more of a location-based silo. So in Mercedes, we are a very global and big company, right? So we have many locations with a lot of freedom sometimes as well. And especially back in those days, it was even worse than it is today, I would say. So all of these locations could basically decide how they run things. So they had their own processes, they had their own tool stacks, they had their own interfaces, they had their own supporting units, and so on and so forth, right? So that was really a quite difficult thing to deal with ultimately from a global perspective. And of course, this also didn't help at all for collaborative efforts, because everywhere you had very boxed in teams which were doing things completely different than other teams, therefore also exchanging information and collaborating on certain efforts was very difficult and tricky. However, I would also argue not just the others were kind of siloed in, but the CERT was as well. And I think maybe some of you have heard that phrase, the CERT didn't play well with others. And I think quite often this is still somehow the case. And I think that's ultimately also something we need to think about and need to really change, right? So basically, once something was reported to the CERT, it was pretty intransparent for the people who reported it or for any of the other stakeholders to know what is really going on, right? Like what kind of process would the CERT follow? What is the current status? What are the next steps? And so on and so forth. So obviously, I thought we can do better. And so we did. So let's make a little bit of a jump. So this is basically the area then starting from 2016 and after. So basically what we did was to revamp the CERT service. So we increased both on capability, but also on staffing. And we also wanted to reflect that in a name change as well, right? So as you might have remembered, before it was called Readiness Team. Now we call it actually Response Team, right? Because it was doing response. So we introduced also more advanced functions like forensic, malware analysis, threat intelligence, and so on and so forth. We also increased the capacity, and now the team was actually doing 24/7 operation. And I think that was, yeah, definitely needed for a big global company like ours. The staffing, however, was still mostly external. And this also, of course, created some difficulties. Then we also launched something in addition. And I would argue what we call here the Cybersecurity Center was actually the first real SOC we had in our organization. So for the first time, we had a team which really had a clear mandate to do holistic threat detection. And this team was also fully staffed for 24/7 operations. We had the team basically operating out of Bangalore. And it was a mix of SMEs, but also people mainly doing triage work and analysis work. So in this setup with those two teams, for the first time, we were actually capable to do 24/7 operations and therefore threat detection and threat response. All right, let's look at the silos again. So you might remember these, right? So these are still there. However, with the launch of the CISSP, we got rid of the data silo. So basically, we made sure that the data, which was formerly very distributed in our organization, gets collected by the CISSP in their global scene. That also meant that we needed to break up not just one silo actually, but multiple silos, right? Because there was, as I mentioned before, there was an antivirus team, but there was also a network operations center, and there were also some other teams which were really clinging on to their data and really having their own processes, which completely needed to be shaken up. This was not easy, but in the end, we achieved it. And so therefore, we got rid of this silo. However, at the same time, if we look at it in retrospective, we have also created a new silo. So actually, I think we kind of did good on one thing, but like kind of not did so well on the other thing. So we had created basically a new silo, which is the CISSP. And why is that there? It wasn't intentionally, of course, but unintentionally it was happening that way. And the huge factor from my perspective was it was under different leadership in a different part of the organization with also some conflicting aspects in their mission. So the big issue we have actually created or seen, especially between the CIRC and the CISSP, was an intransparency in both teams. Of course, they were talking to each other, but I would say not regular enough and also not meaningful enough. And therefore didn't really understand the needs of each other, right? So this resulted then in typical things you might also see in your organization. I like to call it ticket ping pong, right? Where you basically just throw a ticket to the other team and it bounces to the bank and so on and so forth. So not really getting you anywhere, right? So that meant also not a good situation. So it was a rainy day on September 2017. And I think the Futurama gift describes it very well, right? So you can already guess an incident came along. Maybe someone remembers that. And 2017, hands up if you do. A few people. Where are my OT people at? Maybe this one? More clearer? Okay. Yeah. So basically, we got hit by WannaCry. And I think many companies did. But for us, it was really a key incident, which once again highlighted some of the things we kind of have already noticed or identified as issues. But WannaCry very clearly showed us that this is something we need to change and we need to fix. So with WannaCry, we looked at the whole setup from a holistic perspective again. So we didn't just look at like, oh, okay, what happened in the one team, what happened in the other team, what happened in this location, what happened there, but really we took a holistic view on the whole picture. And what basically became very obvious out of that is that the underlying issues, especially within the CIRC and CISSP, were kind of similar, right? So we tried to kind of funnel around with it. We tried to improve things here and there. And I don't know, do more collaboration and have more interaction between the teams. But ultimately, in the course of action of about 3 years, I would say we haven't achieved to really change it to a very well-working setup. So we said like, okay, that's it, right? We are done here. We need something new, and we really need something new, not just small, tiny improvements. So we said, let's get rid of those silos. Let's really tear them down. So now we come to the present. So a little bit of a jump in time, but let me first talk a little bit about the learnings which have actually led us to this present setup. So some of the key learnings were exactly that this whole silo-driven approach and also heavily decentralized approach doesn't really work very well in our favor, especially if you face such a global incident like WannaCry, which affects the whole organization and all of the locations. You need to have a unified response, and you cannot have like teams fighting over like who is doing what, right? So we basically hit the reset button on this whole thing and said like, okay, we kind of start on a green field again and see what do we actually need. So one of the best things we did is actually to start small and branch out, right? So we really thought about like, okay, what is the core objective which we want to achieve? And what are the capabilities we absolutely need in order to achieve that objective? Instead of producing great paper-based processes, we were very good at that in the past, right? Like we nailed it in terms of describing processes and structure and stuff like that. And we said this time we do it different. So we start, we learn, we iterate, and then we document later. We also knew it was super important for us that this team should have is having a high amount of responsibility, but therefore also needs an absolute commitment and backing from a very strong mandate in order to support their mission. So that we are in a situation when really, so to say, shit hits the fan, that we don't have very long decision-making paths, but can act very fast and decisive. So how did we do that? How did we design this whole setup? We first came up kind of with this cycle. So in these 5 steps, we basically looked at the different factors or components which we would need for this team. But we didn't just went through the cycle once. That's also why it's a cycle and not a straight line, right? But we iterated many times through this cycle and actually revisited every here and there some of the components and changed them. So I will now also go through this cycle with you together and describe the different components of our current team. We start with the mandate and mission. The Cyber Intelligence and Response Center, or short for short-term CIRC, it's called. We started initially with really a key claim, right? So staying on top of threats, targeting our environments. Then we introduced also the initial scope as well, right? So to say like, okay, and it's marked in blue because it really started from the blue teaming side, but more on that later. And we also introduced already some collaborative aspects to it, because that's exactly what we have seen previously not being incorporated in their missions and therefore causing quite some issues. So we were not done with this yet, right? And after now quite some iterations, I don't even know how many we have done, but probably a few of them, we now end up with this holistic mission statement. So what you can see marked here in red is the things we added on top of it. One of the first things which stand out here and is marked in green is actually that we also have the mandate for the product world. So the product world at Mercedes is, of course, our vehicles. On top, we added also purple teaming aspects in order to really reflect that we want to achieve proactiveness, right? So that it's no longer just a merely reactive team, but also is doing many things in terms of proactiveness. And last but not least, we even extended the collaborative efforts in our mission statement. And this is especially now here towards our neighbor team, I would say, which is doing more vulnerability management. So let's dive into the capabilities. So based on the mission, we have now basically established 9 capabilities which we deliver. So the bread and butter one, and the one which kind of got it started all, was monitoring and incident management. This capability we deliver, of course, 24/7 and in a 365-day fashion. So this is like, as I said, bread and butter, right? On top, we have forensics, threat intelligence, reporting and improvement, detection and prevention engineering, orchestration and automation, malware, red teaming, and also now the newly added threat hunting and analytics capability. What is quite unique about this setup, I think you have seen these capabilities before, maybe in your own setup or in other setups. But what really stands out here, we deliver this not just for the IT stuff, we deliver this for the OT stuff as well, and we also deliver this for the product side as well. And this is something which I at least have not seen many companies or teams doing, right? So they still have their product cert or OT cert or SOC. So this is, I think, quite unique on how we do things. So the way we organize ourselves is, and we develop these capabilities, is in virtual teams. So the virtual teams are basically also what you have seen in terms of the capabilities. They are spread out and are delivered out of all our 3 follow the sun global hubs. So that enables us to actually do more than just 8x5 for certain functions. That's also what you have seen in the picture before. They're highly self-organized, empowered, and work in an agile way. And I'm not just dropping buzzwords here, but that's really the reality of it. So we give them a lot of freedom in order to, do the right things, basically. So this concept, if I kind of relook at it, is kind of similar to what maybe some of you have seen in the Spotify model. So a virtual team is basically comparable to a chapter. And then we have kind of these 2 clusters, which you see on top, one being defense, the other one being purple. What's also quite unique, we also have these cross layers on the bottom. So you might have noticed that in the mission statement, something was marked in green. And this actually comes back to the vehicle and OT SecOps team. So they are a virtual cross layer, which basically ingest some people with key knowledge about vehicles or about OT into the different VTs. And therefore, also within these VTs, for example, we have some people who are organized in the VT detection engineering and prevention engineering, but we have some key people in there who have very specific knowledge about OT stuff, right? So some of the protocols and things you deal with in OT are very different to what you are dealing with in IT. And that's how basically we achieve it. So let's quickly talk about roles or also job titles. We don't have this typical tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 model. Of course, it still looks kind of like a pyramid, but ultimately, all the people in our team, they already have end-to-end responsibility. So an analyst in our team is not just doing triage work and deciding if it's a true or false positive and then handing it off to the next guy, but actually runs also incidents in an end-to-end manner. Analysts, however, mainly are focusing on what we call ops. So that's basically, as I said, our bread and butter, monitoring and incident management. And then on the specialist and expert level, we always differentiate between more operational focused roles, so monitoring incident management, or more VT focused roles. So the VT focused roles are then more distinct people who work on actually improving and strategically pushing certain capabilities. I mentioned it before. We are organized in hubs. We basically have these 3 hubs which enable us to deliver our services either in a 24/7 fashion or in a more than 8x5 fashion. So besides Stuttgart, we basically have introduced Toronto as a hub and also Singapore as a hub. We evaluated different locations and have decided on these locations based on how skilled people I will find in this respective market, what are the costs, what is the closeness to the business, and what also are the key languages to be spoken. Because I think language does matter a lot, especially if you are dealing with incidents. So we ended up choosing these locations, and also something which is quite unique about the way we run our Follow the Sun setup is we have actually 2 daily check-ins for every team, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. And in these check-ins, the whole team is present and is exchanging on information about what happened that day, is handing over certain items, or is also just spreading knowledge sometimes. And I think that's making us very successful, but also means we have quite big calls. But it's a very good way of increasing the interaction within the team. Okay, let's dive a little bit closer on the locations topic, maybe because it was a little bit too abstract here. So basically, we have the global hubs, and the global hubs deliver what we call the core or current CIRC services. So that's basically defense, purple, vehicle, and OT security operations. But they are not just only delivering that. Also in these hubs, we have people who work on offense operations, so more pen testing and vulnerability management, and also platform operation. And this is very neat because automatically it creates a lot of interaction, even with people who are not part of the CIRC. All right, let's quickly, and I really mean quickly, dive into the tool stack. It's an easy rabbit hole to fall into. That's why I say I kind of want to briefly talk about this, because I think in our industry, we often too much focus on the tool side of things, but ultimately the tool side, from my perspective, doesn't necessarily matter that much. So what I just wanted to highlight here is what is basically in the green box. So that's kind of the stack we mainly operate also within our team. So either fully operate or we do the content engineering on top of the platform. So basically decide what kind of rules or use cases we have on the platform, and how we run things. What is also quite unique, I think, is that you often see here these cloud things popping up. And I didn't put it everywhere. Of course, CrowdStrike is also a SaaS solution, right? But for the SaaS solutions, I just got rid of it. So I think the unique ones are the ones where we have basically established these tools in AWS or Azure ourselves. Because when Corona hit, we said like, okay, we cannot work from office anymore, right? So what are we gonna do? And this really made us heavily transition our overall tool stack. And now we basically can fully work from home. We can deliver all of the capabilities completely remote. And I think that's quite unique. All right, let's talk about game changers. So from my perspective, there's quite some of them out there. And I want to quickly talk about the people game changer. So we have created an awesome setup, which also focus very much on the people side of things. And therefore we have a huge, or we underwent a huge effort to talk about what kind of values do we want to have in our team. These are not just values which are somewhere on a paper, but things we live by day by day. And we also adjust them every here and there when new people come in, so that they also have a chance to influence how we do things in the team. Feel the pain is maybe one I need to explain a little bit more. With feel the pain, we basically mean everyone which is getting onboarded into our team is undergoing the same process. That means they get the same basic knowledge about monitoring and incident management. Why is that? Because everyone who also works in other capabilities is working on improving the situation for the normal SOC analysts and for the incident managers. So this really gives them a very good connection to the work, to the key work that's being done in this team. And this really enables us also to do things which are useful. So just highlighting some of them, I think I said it before, right? We are not doing this tier model anymore. I think it's very outdated. I know it's coming from military, and maybe there the whole thing makes a lot of sense in terms of separation of duties and so on and so forth. However, I think for a global company like ours, it's the wrong way of doing it. So we have been quite successful doing it very differently. And also what is in addition to what I mentioned before, very cool and very important is our team is very open to change. So we embrace change, we see change as a positive thing, and we actually drive change on certain aspects. One example being also my team was one of the first teams in our whole global organization which actually implemented something with LLM with production data. All right, so I need to speed up a little bit. But so a couple of slides on where is this journey now leading us, right? So once again, we have identified some challenges. Further integration into our setup is one of the challenges. So you have noticed that there's the offense team out there as well and the platform team. And here really the idea is to also kind of use this beneficial model also for those teams. But it's not going to be easy. Then we have, of course, some sort of clash between ops work and project work, because some of these resources are shared, right, to some degree. So therefore, here keeping the right balance is always something which we regularly look at and which we also adjust on the go. And then managing the very heterogeneous tool stack is another challenge. All right, so you have seen this picture before, so I don't need to say too much about it. So the idea is here really to integrate the offense team, so the vulnerability management, also into what we call then the one CIRC, right? So also that entails then that we spread out these cross-layer functions, so vehicle and OT, and also platform over to offense, which so far is managing really their own application stack and really not dealing with OT and vehicle so much. So in terms of the roles, we're gonna probably reshape kind of this pyramid to more of a structure like that. That's mainly actually driven from two sides of the same coin, I would say. And one is basically we do a lot of automation and invest a lot of in automation. And second of all, also AI is becoming much more of a thing. I don't think it has reached the maturity, but we will get there, and therefore this will also transform the roles. All right, I will not talk about CNAP because I'm already a little bit over time. So CNAP will transform just the tool stack. And the big thing here is really will move away from a best of breed approach to a more platform approach. All right. So let me go to my last slide. So important for me to take away from this presentation would actually be these 3 points. So from my perspective, sometimes less is more, and that's especially true for paperwork. I know some of the people in financial will be crying, but think about it, and I think you can also achieve it to some degree. Really think about your ops model. I feel like many of us have been boxed in this old school ops model, but can do better. A new joiner in Singapore even said that her friends were really giving her a hard time that she joined the SOC team because life in a SOC is very hard. There's a lot of attrition, stupid tasks, shift works, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something we can change together. Because ultimately, your people are the ones that save you, not your shiny tools or your fancy policies and procedures. So you should put the utmost attention on the people within your team. And with that being said, I'm at the end of my presentation. Thanks very much for listening. Sadly, we don't have so much time for questions, but feel free to chat me up. I think lunch break is coming soon as well. So we'll be thrilled to further discuss or see your points on this one. All right.